with you in this case of graduating students. It's always interesting to see what arises in each year of the survey. Sometimes the results are a little surprising, and sometimes they are unsurprising in that they are exactly what we expected. You'll get both of those. And so we're going to have Nicholas Borodenko from PRA walk us through those results. And then towards the end, we're going to have a conversation about a research project that we have going on related to the surveys. That'll come right at the end. So you'll be free. If you don't want to participate in that conversation, you can drop off. But we are looking for support, help from institutions in making this research project work. So if you could hang out at the end and participate in that, that would be great. All right. So I'm going to turn things over to Nicholas and see if I can figure out how to turn off the chime for when people come into the meeting or leave the meeting.
I can't hear it, so it works for me. So
you can't hear it? Oh, well,
no,
that's fabulous.
That's the key thing.
All right.
And then just in terms of questions, if people have questions throughout, just they can put them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end, or they can save them for the end as well. I always find it valuable as something comes up to put it into the chat to see if it gets answered as opposed to holding on to it. But I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. Good. So this is the presentation on the 2024 graduating student survey. As Glenn mentioned, I'm Nicholas Borodenko, a partner at PRA. Been involved with the CUSC survey now for almost going on 20 years. I think 2025 will be my 20-year anniversary, so get a special medal for that one. So for 2024, this is the 30th cooperative study undertaken by CUSC, which includes in this year 38 universities from across Canada. As people may or may not be aware of, CUSC runs in 3-year survey cycles. So the first year, middle year, and graduating student. So this survey was last done in 2021, so 3 years ago, when there were 32 participating universities. This year's survey was sent to almost 60,000 students from across Canada, yielding responses from almost 13,000, which gives us an overall response rate of around 21%, although this ranges fairly widely across institutions from as low as 8 up to 55%. This was a noticeable, though, decrease in the response rate relative to 2021 when it was at 30%. I will say during the pandemic, a lot of research we conducted, response rates were higher. My theory is that people just had more time on their hands during the pandemic to answer surveys. And so this cohort in 2021 perhaps was in that category where being at home and having less to do gave them more time to complete the survey. One thing we do to ensure that the survey is representative of the population, because not every participating university does a census, is we do weight the results back to the actual size of the institution to get the results we're presenting in today's presentation. So looking at the profile of graduating students, so looking at their what we'll call their personal profile, about 7% have children. 44% identify as a visible minority, and 87% are Canadian citizens. Gender, which is a piece of information supplied by institutions, but we'll also see there are some questions on gender identity in the survey itself. It's about 68% female and 32% male, which is fairly in line. This doesn't overrepresent female respondents by a significant margin. It's about 2/3, 1/3. It overrepresents females by a little bit, but this is very similar to the samples that are provided by institutions. It's about 24 and a half, so almost 25 years of age for graduating students, and overall about 5% identify as Indigenous and 63% are single. We do find some differences here, which I'll speak to as we go through today's presentation. For example, here, we do find that students attending what are defined as Group 1 universities, so these tend to be smaller universities, those that tend not to offer graduate programs or don't have law or medical schools, if you will, they tend to have students that are older on average. Because of that, Group 1 students also tend to be more likely to be married and have children. Students at Group 3 universities, so Group 3 universities would be the largest institutions, those with medical and law programs. Those universities tend to have a higher proportion of graduate students who identify as a visible minority. So looking at disability impairments, so 35%, about 1/3 of those who took the survey say that they have some type of disability or impairment. Most commonly a mental health issue at 20%. So though 1/3 indicate they have a disability or impairment, it's about just over 10% say that their issue is something that impacts them daily, amongst those neurodivergence at 6%. Looking at how students get to and from where they live and how they get to and from their institution, the largest groups are those who either rent off-campus housing or live with their families, almost evenly split between those two groups. What we do find is the older a student is, the more likely they are to report living in their own home and less likely to be living with parents, which is not surprising. Amongst those who are not currently living on campus, those who identify as a visible minority are more likely to say they would prefer to live on campus. 28% of those not living on campus who are visible minorities say they would prefer to live on campus, compared to 13% of non-visible minority students. In terms of commuting, it's almost evenly split between those who use public transit and those who use a vehicle. A lot of that is going to be driven by the location of the institution itself and the community it is in. What we do find is some difference here amongst groups. Younger students are more likely to report that they walk to their university, and younger students typically are more likely to also use public transportation. Visible minority students are also more likely to use public transportation and less likely to use a vehicle. Looking at graduate students now, their academic profile. About 81% of students in the survey were taking university full-time. About 49% report an average of A- or higher. And reminder, this is a self-reported grade, which will typically tend to be inflated because no one is going to probably report a grade less than what they think they have. And about 1 in 5 students have transferred from another institution. There is some relationships here by some variables. The older a student is, the less likely they are to be attending university full-time. 92% of graduating students 21 and younger are attending full-time, and that drops down across age groups down to 50% of those who are 30 and older. The older a student is, also the more likely they are to have transferred from another institution, and the more likely they also are to have interrupted their studies for 1 or more semesters. Looking at practical program experience, so practical program experience from institution to institution, the language or wording used to define this is going to vary, but 55% say they have some sort of work or learning experience. And the next graph here shows, the various ways, and this question is really just to try to capture how institutions define it, so it's much easier for students to figure out, well, yes, I know I'm taking a practicum or a co-op or work experience, whereas I said the language is typically going to change from institution to institutions. Looking at delays in their completion of their program, 37% say there has been some sort of delay in the completion of their program. Typically, that is going to be that the required courses that they needed to take were not available in the term or semester they were looking to take them. The youngest students, so as age increases, they're more likely to have experienced some type of delay. Those 21 and under, only 18% have experienced some type of delay, whereas older groups, typically that ranges from 44 to 55% who have experienced some delay in completing their program. There's also some relationship here with grade. Students with a grade of A- or higher, only a quarter of those say they've experienced a delay, compared to 47% of those with a B or B+ grade, or 71% of those with a C+ or lower grade. Looking at activities in terms of what students are doing on or off campus. In terms of their campus activities, this is what they do often or very often. Most likely they're participating in student clubs, often or very often. There is some relationship here with age. Typically speaking, the older a student is, the less likely they are to participating in almost any of these activities, often or very often. When we look at volunteer, either on or off campus, about 1/5 of students say they volunteer often or very often. And for those who do volunteer, they average about just under 5 hours, 4.6 hours per week of volunteer activities. Looking at their study patterns, which is one of my favorite things to look at for students. So in terms of, we look at their study patterns in class and outside of class, you can see that there's not a huge difference between their in-class and outside of class. They do spend slightly more time in than out. So if you look at the average hours, outside of class averages about 18 hours, whereas in class is about 13, or a ratio of about 3:2. So for every 2 hours in class, they're spending about 3 hours outside of class, which is not typically speaking, the proportion that most instructors, professors would like to see students taking towards their academic studies. So that averages out to about 30 hours-ish per week on their academic studies. There is some relationship here with some variables. So for example, the older a student is, they spend less time in class. Again, that's going to be related to the fact that they are more likely to be attending part-time. Of interest, though, there's a difference in terms of the hours in class, but by age, there's almost no difference in terms of hours outside of class. So in terms of the ratio of in class to outside class, the older you are, your ratio increases, so you spend more time outside than inside of class, although the total number is very similar for outside. There also is some relationship by grades in terms of spending time outside of class. Students with an A- or higher report spending 19 hours per week on average outside of class, compared to those with a C+ or lower, they spend 15 hours outside of class per week. So a 4-hour difference, or almost 30% more time for those A- or higher students. Looking at their employment, so 62% say that they are currently employed in some capacity, averaging just under 20 hours per week. When we ask students what type of impact that has on their academic performance, whether it has a positive, no impact, or a negative, you can see that more students report that it has a negative than positive impact of about 2-to-1. Some relationships here as well. Female students are more likely than male students to be currently employed. 68% of female students are currently employed, compared to 52% of male students. There also is some relationship here by age. The older a student is, the more hours they work on average, which is likely going to be related to the fact that, again, the older a student is, the more likely they are to be attending part-time in their final year. Looking at their educational experiences and their perceptions of professors. So we asked two components, two aspects of professor. The first is looking at their performance. So that is how well professors are doing. And what we do tend to find is they tend to be very positive, but these on the left-hand side are going to be the top 5 areas where professors are performing the best. And what we see is, when we ask students what is most important for professors to focus on, there's not a huge correlation between, other than seeming knowledgeable, which is where they perform the best. It's the third most important. In terms of most important areas, it's communicating well and being well organized. And when we look at where those rank in terms of performance, out of 13 different aspects, some of those rank towards the bottom. So for example, providing useful feedback and being intellectually stimulating, which are in the top 5 of being most important, those rank 10th and 11th in terms of performance for their instructors. In terms of the opportunity to evaluate teaching in their courses, What we tend to find is that about 2/3 say that they're able to evaluate the teaching in all of their courses, and 19% in most, and just 3% say they have not been able to evaluate the teaching in any of their courses this year. In terms of their satisfaction with the overall quality of teaching, do they agree or disagree? They are satisfied with the quality of teaching. It's about the biggest group are those who just agree. 2/3 agree that they're satisfied, whereas 17% strongly agree, which is almost the same as the combined proportion of those who disagree, or would technically, I guess, be dissatisfied with the quality of teaching that they're receiving. Looking at perceptions of staff, so we have just 2 questions here. Whether or not they find support staff helpful, and whether or not teaching assistants are helpful. Again, a fair amount of agreement with these 2 statements. Looking at inclusivity, so this is a newer group of questions for the CUSC survey. So this question's asked where students feel most comfortable being themselves. In terms of where they feel most comfortable, it's interacting with their friends on campus, also tied with just attending class. Where we see students being less comfortable is interacting with students they don't know well, attending campus social events, or actively participating in campus social activities. And that's where they feel comfortable being themselves. So typically speaking, interactions in class tend to be ones where they feel more comfortable being themselves than we see in some of those outside of class activities. Looking at students' growth and development, where they feel that they have grown much or very much. So we group these into various types of skills. So the top 5 skills we see in terms of where they have grown the most are working independently and ability to find and use information. That's where they feel that they have grown the most, with almost 3/4 saying they have grown in those areas much or very much. In terms of areas where they see less growth, these tend to be in areas that perhaps don't apply or don't fit into all of the programs. For example, spirituality, second or third language skills, or entrepreneurial skills. We do see a few differences here, most notably that we do see a difference between male and female students. 45% of male students say that their university has contributed much or very much to their mathematical skills, compared to 27% of females. We also asked students to rate what are the most important areas for their growth and development. And their most important areas are skills and knowledge for employment, thinking logically and analytically, and dealing successfully with obstacles to achieve an objective. Looking at whether or not their university experiences have met, fallen short, or exceeded their expectation, the biggest group are those who say that their institution has simply just met their expectations, with almost even split between those who say that the university has exceeded or fell short of their expectations. In terms of satisfaction with university experiences, so those who are satisfied or very satisfied, they're most satisfied with their personal safety on campus at 86%, dropping down to the availability of information about career options in their area down to 61%. Two areas here in terms of satisfaction with their university: the overall quality of education and the concern for them shown as an individual. You can see that students have greater satisfaction with the overall quality of their education. Over 80% are satisfied with the quality of education, whereas just under 60% are satisfied with the concern shown for them as an individual. Other areas of satisfaction we see is whether or not they are satisfied belonging to a university or receiving good value for money. And you can see that here about almost 3/4 agree that they are satisfied with belonging, where about 60% agree that they receive good value for money. Looking at the impact of Indigenous experiences on campus. So here we ask students whether or not they agree with the Indigenous course content enriching their experience and Indigenous activities or events enriching their experiences. We do tend to find that Students are more likely to agree with course content than activities or events. A lot of this has to do with the fact that there's a very big proportion for both questions that say that this is not applicable, indicating that they may not have experienced these well at their institution. Now we ask students whether or not they would recommend their institution to others, which is commonly known as the Net Promoter Score. It's a question asked on an 11-point scale, so from 0 to 10. And then these are grouped into 3 themes, what we call promoters, passives, and detractors. And so what you do to get your Net Promoter Score is you take your promoters, which are those who rate a 9 or 10 out of 10, and you subtract your detractors, which are those who rate a 6 or lower, to get your Net Promoter Score. So amongst graduating students, their Net Promoter Score is a -7. So that 25% of promoters minus 32% of detractors. You do see some differences here across groups. Smaller institutions do tend to have a slightly better Net Promoter Score. I think what's interesting is when you compare this to other survey years, so middle years and first years. So for example, last year, the middle year survey, the Net Promoter Score was a -13. And in first years, it's a +1. And so what we tend to see is students in their first year, they're saying, yeah, I like it. Well, they're more likely to say they would like it and promote it. They get into their middle years where perhaps they start to meet some challenges and some barriers as they move through their program. And then as they get out or graduating, they become a slightly more positive, but still lean more towards negative. What you do see for those institutions who may use this or similar question in any graduating student survey, so surveys done after students have left the institution, what you do find is this Net Promoter Score does increase again to become more positive. And so once students leave their institutions, they tend to become more positive about their experiences there. We do find a number of differences here amongst a number of different variables. For example, age plays a role here. So the Net Promoter Score amongst those who are 22 to 24, which tends to be the biggest group, their Net Promoter Score is a -13, whereas those students who are 30 and older, their Net Promoter Score is a +11. Male students, which is very typical of men to have more negative perceptions than women, their Net Promoter Score is a -14 compared to female students, which is a -4. There's also a very big relationship here by grade. Those with an A- or higher have a Net Promoter Score of +2 compared to those with a C or lower, and their Net Promoter Score is a -26. So if you wanted to tell your alumni departments, how do we get people to be more positive about their experiences? Grade inflation. That's, I guess, how you do it. Looking now at students' goal development or developments, so 39% say they intend to apply to grad school this year or this upcoming year, and 22% intend to apply to a professional program. In terms, there's some relationship here with grades. As students' reported grades go up, they are more likely to expect to apply to graduate school. 45% of those with an A- or higher intend to apply to graduate school compared to those with a C+ or lower at just 20%. Looking at their careers, 38% say they have a specific career in mind, while 25% know their career options very well. In terms of steps taken for employment, most of the steps students have taken for employment, I would say, are steps that tend to be a little less concrete. So for example, talking with friends and talking with parents are not necessarily concrete steps. I'm actually surprised that only 75% have only talked to their friends about employment. Well, 3/4 have a resume, CV, or e-portfolio. 4% of students who answer this indicate they've taken no steps to prepare for employment after graduation. There is some relationship here by age. As students get older, they're less likely to have talked to parents or friends about their employment plans and less likely to have created a resume. Those who have higher grades are more likely here to have talked to their professors about employment. 53% of those with an A- or higher say they've talked to their professors about employment, compared to just 29% of those with a C+ or lower. Looking at facilities and services, So we asked about 26 different facilities and services they could use on campus. So we look at both use and satisfaction. The most commonly used resource is library e-resource services. And so these are services used in their current year, so their last year of university. And that's followed by 4 others that over a third use: food, parking, university bookstore, both physical and online. Some relationships here: as students get older, they're less likely to report using athletic facilities. And we also find that those who identify as a visible minority are more likely to use international services for international students. So as I mentioned, it's both use and satisfaction. So when we look at satisfaction with most of these services tends to be quite high at the aggregate level, over 73%. There is one exception to that, which is parking. Only 39% of students say they are satisfied with parking, which could be for a myriad of reasons. Parking, whether or not there's enough, the price of that parking, how close it is to their institution, so on and so forth. If you've looked at this question historically, it's a question that has been fairly consistent over time. What you will see as a change over time is this used to be parking and food services as being 2 very low, but food services over time have slowly crept up now to be close to or similar to other types of services on campus. But parking historically has sort of always, satisfaction, no matter which cohort you're looking at, has sort of always been around like the 35 to 45% mark, depending on which institutions are participating in a given year in terms of satisfaction with parking. Looking at students' finance. So how do they finance their education? Looking at credit cards, 93% say they have at least one credit card, with 80% not carrying a balance. But amongst those who are carrying a balance on their credit card, it averages to almost $5,000 of debt. We do tend to find that students at Group 1 universities, so that is the smallest universities, do tend to carry a higher debt amount on their credit card than those who are attending Group 2 or Group 3 universities. We also tend to find that older students are more likely to be carrying, not only are they more likely to have a credit card, they're more likely to be carrying a monthly balance on their card. We also tend to find that there is some relationship here by grades. Students with higher grades are less likely to be carrying a balance on their credit card and carry a lower balance than students with lower grades. In terms of how they're financing their education, 45% of students say they have required at least some debt to finance their education, with the most common by far being government student loans. Other areas of debt: loans from family, loans from bank, and other sources. You can see on the right-hand side that those 4 do not sum to 45%, because there will be students with multiple forms of debt, but by far the biggest component of that is government loans. When we look at the debt amounts, so looking at those just with debt, the average debt is around $29,000 in education-related debt. When you sum this across all students, you look at the aggregate, it averages to about $13,000 in debt per student. A couple relationships here. I'll just first look at, again, government loans make up the biggest chunk of that debt at about $25,000 on average. We do see some relationship here by a couple components. As students get older, their average debt increases from about $9,000 for those who are 21 and younger up to $20,000 for those 30 and older, and that's across all students, not just those with debt. And also those with lower grades, they also report a higher debt level than those with higher grades. In terms of financing, so how much does it cost them just to finance and pay for their current year of studies? It's just under $20,000 to finance their current year of studies. And usually students report about 2.5, so almost 3 different sources to finance their current years, with the most common being parents or family, government loans, their current work, scholarships, and summer work. Now, these percentages don't necessarily align with how much they derive from each of these sources. So for example, those top 3 average around $9,000 to $10,000 in their current year, whereas scholarships, which are used by 30%, only average about $28,000 in terms of how much it contributes to their current year. In terms of financing, there is a myriad of differences here. Male students are more likely to say that they use co-ops or internships to pay for their current year. Age plays a big factor. Older students are less likely to say that they use parents or family, earnings from summer work, or RESPs to finance. Visible minority students are less likely to use summer work to pay for their current year. Grade plays a role here. Those with higher grades are more likely to say that they use scholarships, bursaries, or awards to pay for their current year. Also, we find that younger students tend to use more sources, so a variety of sources. So for example, those 21 and younger use almost 3 sources on average, whereas those 30 and older, so as you get older, they just use 2 sources on average. We also tend to find that older students require more to finance their current year. So around, for those 21 and younger, it's about 17,000. And as you go up to those 30 and older, it's around 28,000 to finance their current year. Post-graduation plans. So what are they looking to do in the next 5 years? So 68% say they're going to take some type of further education, perhaps graduate school. So almost half expect to go to graduate school in the next 5 years. Or take about a quarter will take a professional program. 13% expect to take some other type of university undergrad. 6% are going to go to a community college or CEGEP. 5% going to go to a tech or vocational school, and 12% expect to take some other type of education. In terms of the impact that debt has, first and foremost, 30% say they have no debt. So debt does not impact their future education decisions. Where you've got these two groups, which is about a third of students say that their current debt either discourages them or prevents them from taking education. About 22% say that their current debt has no impact on their future education decisions. And there's 8% who say they need to repay their debt before they think about or take any future education. Those relationship here by age, those who are younger are more likely to say they have no debt and therefore does not impact their future education. In terms of their post-graduation employment, so we asked them what employment they may have already secured for after graduation, and about 37% say they already have post-graduation employment secured. That looks like for those with employment, they have about a median income around $48,000. And almost 90% say they are satisfied with their current employment. About 54% also indicate that they're looking for work for post-graduation at the moment, which leaves about 10% who say they neither have a job lined up or are looking for post-graduate work. In terms of those with employment, 42% say requires a specific degree, while 70% say it requires any degree, with almost 2/3 saying that their job is strongly or moderately related to their skills they are required as part of their program. 71% say they are taking this employment is going to be full-time, and 65 or 2/3 say it is permanent. There's some relationship here by age. As students get older, the average salary, the average median salary increases in terms of what students have arranged for post-graduation employment. Looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, EDIA components. So this is student self-report gender identity. As mentioned before, the gender we reported earlier is what is supplied in the sample files from institutions. So this is a multiple response, so students can select as many genders as they feel are appropriate. What you tend to find is about 91% identify solely as either a man or a woman. And then you have other groups represented here. In terms of their sexual orientation, 68% identify as heterosexual, and then followed by these various other communities. It should also be noted that about 10% of students indicate that they prefer not to provide an answer to this question. So this is information from a module specifically designed. So each year, CUSC adds a module which is an optional set of questions that institutions can opt into. This year was looking at AI, or artificial intelligence, used to assess how students think about, feel, and use AI as part of their studies. So when asked how familiar they are with AI, 95% say they are at least slightly familiar with AI. Male students are more likely than female students to say that they are familiar with AI. And as age increases, they are also more likely to say that they are familiar with AI. In terms of the most common AI tools used for any purpose, so this doesn't necessarily have to just be for education. So the most common one is ChatGPT, which it makes up almost all of those who have used at least one. And there are 35% who have not used any type of AI for any purpose. So amongst those who have used AI for any purpose, we asked them what they used AI for. And it's really, there's no specific purpose. It's often used for aspects such as brainstorming or understanding class materials, researching, solving problems, writing assignments, or generating code. In terms of how AI is regulated, 58% say that instructors regulate the use of AI in class, while 40% say their university regulates the use of AI in class. As students get older, they are less likely to say that their instructors regulate the use of AI in class. In terms of how students feel about the impact of AI, whether or not it's going to have a positive impact, 42% say it's going to have a positive impact on their work or field of study, while 32%, or about 1/3, say it's going to have a positive impact on their learning environment. Older students are less likely to say that AI is going to have a positive impact on their learning environment. So now looking at an experiment. So each year, CUSC also brings in or does some type of experiment, primarily to look at the impact on either data quality or response rates. And so this year's experiment was designed to see if the use of messages, so pre-designed messages within the survey, would help to improve completion rates by helping to have a positive effect on persistence. And so universities that opted into the experiment had 10% of their sample randomly assigned to the experiment. And what happened is there are 3 points in the survey where students would come across a message that would appear on screen, sort of prompting them or providing some positive feedback at about the quarter mark. So about 1/4, halfway, and 3/4 through the survey. And you can see that the 3 prompts here were used. And so students would be completing the survey, they'd finish a set of questions, and if they're at the quarter mark, then they'd see this prompt appear on screen and then continue to move through the survey. So in total, there were 43 institutions that opted into the experiment. Should be noted that there are more institutions that opted into this experiment because this experiment was open to non-CUSC members. So the results presented here are only for CUSC members, but the experiment is open to any institution that participates, even if they're a non-member institution. So looking at the results. So when we look at the full samples, looking at all those who were assigned. So in terms of the completion rate, amongst the experiment group, 20.3% completed the survey. Amongst the non-experiment group, 21.1% completed the survey. So you can see that the total response rate was lower for the experimental group, so the group that received the prompts, than those who did not receive the prompts. Now, that perhaps could be driven by other factors. Maybe there was something weird where that group who received the experiment, which they wouldn't know going in, may have had something weird. So maybe we just look at the percent that started the survey. So we do see that there is a slightly higher group that began the survey amongst the non-experiment group than the experimental group. But what we do see is that when we looked at those rates, we don't see any difference amongst these groups where any institution had a higher response rate amongst that experimental group. So I also looked at a few other things to try to figure things out. So there is some evidence to suggest that these responses on screen may have actually had perhaps some negative impact on persistence to complete. So for example, the first message, which appears about a quarter of the way through. So if we look at the question prior to that message, we see that about 1.6% of students who reached the question prior to the message, they dropped off. So they, when they get to the question before the prompt, 1.6% didn't answer that question. Then once they see the prompt, 3.5% then dropped from the survey, leading to the next question. And we see almost the same thing with the second prompt. So at the 50% mark, at the question just before, there were no students who stopped doing the survey. So they moved from one question to another. I think it's technically like point something, but it's basically 0%. Then the group who gets to the message, 3.2% then drop off after receiving that second message. By the time they get to the third message, we don't see that same behavior. So the question before, 1.9% drop off just before, and then when they get to the message, only 0.2. So by the time they get to that third message, that message has become, they're familiar with it, they understand it, but it does seem that those first couple of messages make students drop off at a higher rate than when they're not getting these messages. So at the end of the day, you know, the message did not seem to have a positive impact. There's almost no evidence to indicate it had a positive impact. And in fact, it may have had a very, very minor negative impact on response rates. So although those messages were intended to help increase persistence, the drop-off rate may have been impacted for a couple of reasons. One is, as students are completing the survey, you sort of get into a train of thought or a rhythm, and that message sort of appears, and it may break that rhythm. It may cause students to sort of stop the pace they were at. Another thing too is because this is an uncommon method of getting people to complete surveys, perhaps students may have perceived it more as a warning to say, oh my gosh, if they are telling me to keep going, perhaps there is a concern here. Maybe the survey is longer than I had expected, and therefore maybe I should drop off. Now again, this didn't have major impacts, but it definitely didn't have the intended strong positive impact that has been potentially hypothesized. So has been the case in many years that I've been discussing is that the primary motivators to complete the survey are going to be two components. It's going to be a combination of an intrinsic factor, so they're simply just going to be students who will complete the survey no matter what it is, no matter what the topic or what it is, they're going to complete the survey. That's that intrinsic motivator. There's also going to be those external motivators, institutions that offer some type of incentive or reward for completing it. Those two are going to be the biggest driving factors for completion. And if we've seen this or other experiments that CUSC has done over the years, things that sort of happen either within the survey itself or other factors don't seem to have as much of a positive or any impact. So a couple closing before we get to the discussion that Glenn had mentioned about some additional work that CUSC is undertaking. Just like to mention that, for 2025, CUSC will be doing the first year student survey, which looks at a variety of aspects such as how they selected their institution, the information they use, the sources of information, their satisfaction with some of the components of registration, and some of those core questions around satisfaction with services and professors. This presentation will be uploaded to CUSC's YouTube channel for those who would like to watch or listen to this again or share it with their colleagues in September. And the AGM will be held in early November, and so you can look for information from CUSC coming out about that, and all are welcome to sit in and attend that virtual AGM. And also, if you're going to the SERPA conference in Fredericton in October, feel free to stop by and talk to CUSC at their exhibitor booth at the 2024 conference. So I think before we get into the assessment of the CUSC surveys that Glenn had mentioned, I think we'll just, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen momentarily and we'll get into any questions that may have appeared or come up.
Right. The one that, well, aside from asking whether this is going to be recorded, yes, it is. You just said that. You don't have to go to YouTube to do it, to see it. It will be on our website. And then we'll also take the PowerPoint and turn that into a PDF that can accompany that. And since we have all your registration emails, we'll send those who registered for the webinar a notice when that's all available. The other thing that's come through in chat is there's a comment from David Paul there. Maybe you want to respond to that comment a little bit, because it offers a bit of a theory about what's going on.
Yeah, so it does sort of imply that the comment here is that the message, sort of gives that implication. If I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. Hold on, just. Oops, don't want to go all the way to the beginning. Thank you very much. It is a good point that these oh my gosh, why? Sweet Mother Mercy. I don't want to do this. Why is it taking me here? I'm just going to share it normal way then. So it does these messages here. I think it's a good point. They do perhaps signal sort of a warning, right? Especially as we get to prompt 2 that says you're cruising to the halfway point. So it does perhaps give some warning signs. If you do get this prompt here and you're at the halfway point and you go, holy smokes, I've been on the survey for whatever it is, 5 minutes, 10, 15, 20, however long you've been on. Some of these messages again may work. Going in, I would have suspected that they theoretically should have had a positive impact, but again, there's very, very little evidence at any institution that their experimental group had a higher completion rate than their non-experimental group. So there's really these prompts, if anything, going forward, you would not want to have them in.
Yeah, Sammy also has a comment that it gives the impression that you're being watched.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's monitoring your progress through. No, nobody's monitoring your progress as you go through, but it does make it feel like somebody's watching over your shoulder as you complete this. So that may be part of the impact is the creep factor of somebody is watching what I'm doing here.
It's fair. I think these are all fair, and I think the in discussions with the CUSC board, the experiment for this upcoming year is going to focus on the impact of incentives and what those incentives really do. I think to give some really good numbers to the impact that incentives or additional incentives can have on response rates.
Right.
Good. So I'm going to just talk now about the assessment of CUSC surveys. And so institutions may have received an email asking for some assistance in this. And so what the board is doing is looking to undertake some assessment of their current slate of surveys through qualitative testing of these, or what some people may be more familiar with is, what might be commonly referred to in academics, sort of a psychological testing of the surveys. And really it is what it is to get students together to discuss the questions to ensure that they are, at the very least, providing face valid responses. And so what we're asking for assistance with, is to have institutions help with recruiting students to participate in the research. And so the way the research will be run is we, or PRA, will provide a link to an online registration where students can go and register to potentially be part of this. So they'll provide their name, a contact email, some information about the institution they go to, what year they're in, to make sure that we assign them, to look at the right. We don't want, first year survey or first year students commenting on the graduating and vice versa. So we have to gather some information about those. And so we'll provide a link that institutions can use to promote via internal channels, social media, email, whatever works for them, to help students register for these. And then, so this will be happening in the fall, and what we're looking for is about 200 to 300 students from across Canada. And what we're looking for, we're hoping for, is a cross section of institutions, looking for both, group 1 and 2 and 3 institutions. We're looking for students who, from various provinces. We're trying to get a qualitative research is never going to be representative of any group, but what we're trying to do is ensure that we have what I'll refer to as a nice mix of students from across Canada to ensure that we're hearing all the various perceptions we can, trying to look for international students, trying to look for students who are both older and younger to comment on the survey and help us understand if the questions are working as they're intended. And so in the fall, we'd ask institutions to help promote these internally to their students. And again, we're looking for 200 to 300. So, we're not looking for institutions to bear the full weight. We're not looking for them to try to get, a huge group of students, but even sending it out to a small cohort and having, 10 to 15 students register would be helpful. For students who register and then are selected to participate with the research beginning in October, there's going to be two types of qualitative research we're conducting. We're going to be conducting focus group sessions and one-on-one interviews. For those who take part in the focus groups, which will be a little bit longer, they'd receive an honorarium of $75. For those who participate in the one-on-one interviews, those would be $50. And the students would be, assigned to those as is. They could select which type they'd prefer to, and of course they could select both. What we're really looking for is a large enough group, this 200 to 300, large enough group to allow us some ability to have that diversity we are looking for. This is the first time in about 10-ish years that CUSC has undertaken this qualitative assessment, and there's been changes to the survey over time. And I think it's, as the board is always looking to do, looking for continual improvements, it's about time to check in on these surveys as well through some testing. And so what we're looking for is institutions to put their names forward to participate in whatever capacity they can. As I mentioned, PRA will be providing a link. We're looking for institutions to promote it internally to their students in whatever capacity they can. And so some emails have already gone out asking institutions to opt in, and we've had some institutions opt in to help us participate. And we're looking for some more institutions to put their name forward. And again, we're not looking for institutions to, this doesn't need to be a big undertaking. As we've talked about, it can be as big or small as institutions are willing and able to assist. So I think at this point, as Glenn mentioned, I think I'll just stop sharing and then just open it up to any, I don't know, Glenn, if you had pointed questions, but any comments or questions or anything like that?
Jordan Power has already dropped a question into the chat asking whether we're looking for CUSC member institutions or also non-member institutions, and non-member institutions are just fine.
Yes.
That would be actually somewhat helpful. Our biggest challenge in this will be in the recruitment process for participants to ensure that we geographically and by institution type and by language represent the sort of group of potential participants well. So either members or non-members are welcome to participate. You might tell them how they can volunteer. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, so once they volunteer, like it would simply just be to contact the CUSC administrator at admin@CUSC.CCREU.ca, or they can contact their dash. There you go. Thank you. Or myself. They can contact me directly at boardenco@pra.ca. And in terms of putting your name or your institution forward, we're really leaving it up to the institutions to decide what or how they can recruit students. For example, I've talked to some institutions and they're simply sending it out to a small cohort that their office may be in contact with. I know I've spoken to one person who they're going to put it out to specifically to some of the specific student associations to help promote. Others are going to do sort of a blanket email or do some social media promotion. So really it's up to each institution to decide what or how they can assist. I think the key here is what we're looking for is, as I mentioned, as much of a cross section of students as humanly possible. If we end up with all students from just a small number of institutions, from a specific a group or size, what we'll really be doing is sort of missing the variety of experiences we're looking for to make sure these questions work for all students.
That's right. This is a question I hadn't thought of until this moment. As institutions volunteer to participate, are you going to be sending them a sort of text description of how they can describe this work to the students? And of course, you'll be sending the link out. But do institutions have to make anything up to send out to their students?
Yeah, we'll be providing sort of what I'll call sort of a blanket description. And institutions can feel free to just, put that, it's probably not going to be necessarily social media friendly. So there may be some play there if that's the means in which institutions want to use it. But what we'll be providing is sort of just the text that describes to students the purpose, what they're signing up for, and what is their honorarium, which are the key things. So that will have information already at hand for institutions. So realistically, if you're able to sort of take that and put that into an email and blast that out to students, that would be of most value. And theoretically, students could send it around to other friends that they know at other institutions. They could do that as well. We'll maybe put that now. I thought about now. We'll just put that into the registration page. Be like, send this to your friends. If they go to some other institution, if you had friends go off to this university or that university or this college, that'd be great. So this shouldn't be, definitely should not require a lot of work and effort. Like everyone's got enough work and stuff on their plate. So what we're hoping to is just provide information and have institutions just simply promote or send that out in whatever way is going to be most feasible for them.
All right. We've got a minute or two left. Does anybody have a question they want to drop into chat about this, or if something occurred to you about the results of the survey, you could probably jump back to that. Be good if we had like waiting music, like game shows too here. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything pop up. So thank you, Nicholas, for your work in taking us through the results of the survey. It is interesting, and we appreciate that effort. As I said before, this will be available on our website and a copy of the presentation there as well. So you can use that for some of your internal work, contextualizing some of your own results if you like. And so that's very helpful to us. Thank you all for joining us and participating in the webinar today. It's important that not only that we do the surveys, but that the results of the surveys are shared widely. So we appreciate you participating today. Hopefully we will see you all at SERPA, and maybe that you'll join our AGM and register to participate in the survey. So thanks very much, and we will see you all in the future.